Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for coming back. Welcome to our webinar, again on the GCS Grant Central System Change Request Amendment Process. Again, my name is Michelle Mann, and I am with the Cal OES Victim Services Branch. And today for this webinar, we will be providing an overview of the Change Request Amendments process in the Grant Central System, or GCS, for our Victim Services Grant Subaward. And before we proceed, I would like to provide some details for our webinar today. The chat feature is disabled, but we will stop at some points during this presentation to answer questions. Participants will be able to ask questions live by raising their virtual hands. If you're in this meeting room, you'll see the hands icon with the word raise underneath it. You can raise your hand and hit that, and when we call on you, we will be able to unmute you so you can pose your questions. We also please ask that questions that you may ask during this webinar are specific to the information provided or covered related to GCS change request amendments. If you do have any specific questions to your organization's grant subawards, such as a payment request question or a modification, please reach out to your Cal OES grants analyst to discuss these issues. And now that we've gone over that, we're ready to proceed. Again, we are going over the GCS change request amendments process. The amendments are one of two change processes available in GCS, and the first of which is modifications. Now, we won't be covering modifications today, but modifications are simple changes that are initiated by the subrecipient, and they are changes that the subrecipient can make related to their executed grant subaward. And these include changes to the implementing agency, budget changes. Now, we will be talking budget changes related to amendments, but the difference with a modification budget change is that there are funds allocated to the overall grant subaward funding. So if you're making changes within an existing grant subaward budget, that is a modification. And of course, here are some other modification options: changing to your operational agreement, programmatic grant subaward income, contact information, and of course, payment mailing address. But for the purposes of today's training, we will be covering the GCS change request amendment process. The amendments are basically a contractual change to the grant subaward. And these will require changes on a higher level in 4 areas to the grant subaward. And I'll mention this now, and I'll mention this throughout the presentation, that please be reminded that amendments can only be initiated by Cal OES. So that would be initiated by the Cal OES grant analyst or initiated by the unit chief. So the 4 options for amending an executed grant subaward include changes to the amount of funding, changes to fund sources allocated to the grant subaward, changes to the grant subaward performance period, or when the subrecipient organization or agency changes their agency name. So this slide demonstrates what the process looks like in GCS, and it also demonstrates the levels of changes and actions that are required in order to complete the amendments process. So the parts that we will be covering in depth today are basically the first five steps. It starts from initiating the change request by Cal OES all the way to making the changes to the necessary forms and submitting those changes by the subrecipient to the review, approval, and signatures. I will briefly touch on the additional processes, but this is what it'll look like. These are the various status options or the status um, document status terminologies in GCS. So here we will start with the players or those that will be involved in these first 5 steps that we're going to be covering. This includes, again, it starts with Cal OES initiating the amendment change and status, changing it to from grant subaward executed to change request in progress. Then subrecipients will do their part to make changes to the necessary forms and submit those changes to Cal OES. And then the Cal OES grants analyst and will review and approve, and the unit chief will then review and approve. And then the last step, which is a new step, which we'll talk about later in this presentation, is the subrecipient will sign the approved amendment changes. So here is a little diagram. This delineates the 5 steps to the change request amendment process that will involve Cal OES Victim Services Branch and the subrecipient. And the first step we will be covering now is who can initiate the amendment. So again, the amendment is initiated by the grants analyst or the unit chief. And what they will be looking at is when they go into their status, when they go into the grant subaward executed, they do have the option to initiate a change request. And so when they select initiate a change request, they will be taken, when they open the change request, they will complete this. This is the screen that they have. They will select the amendment option, and at which time the 4 options for the amendments will be opened. So they can pick 1 or more types of the options, amendment types. And when they select a particular amendment type, this will unlock the relevant forms that are related to that specific type of amendment. We will discuss the 4 amendment types and the forms that are unlocked in regard to these specific amendment types in the following slides. And then lastly on this form, the grants analyst will include a justification. The justification section will be completed to include a description of the amendment and any specific details related to the amendment. So once that this page is completed, they will save it and submit it for unit chief review. And when the unit chief has completed their review and approval process, and the document status will change from change request initiated to change request change in progress. So before we proceed any further with the, going into the 4 amendment types and the forms unlocked, I want to offer this opportunity for anyone who has questions at this point. If you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we will call on you and unmute your mic so you can ask your question. So are there any hands raised?
I see 1. I see 3. So Karen Stein, I have unmuted your mic, and now you can unmute your mic.
Hi everyone. Quick question: when one of the an amendment is initiated, does the system allow for an email prompt from the grant analyst that will come out to each of the subrecipients?
So are you asking if a notification will be sent out when the change request is initiated or completed or changed to change in progress?
When it's added, when the task is added for the amendment, to Grant Central system, just so that we as the subrecipients know there is a new task for us to give attention to.
Yes, your Cal OES grants analyst will notify you of a change of the change request.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Next, we have Deborah Harris, and I'm allowing her mic. Deborah, you are able to unmute yourself at this time. Deborah? You can unmute. All right. I will move on to Debbie S. I'm allowing your mic, and you can unmute yourself. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Okay, so I will move on to Kieran. I'm going to enable your mic at this time, and you can unmute it. And I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Kieran. You are able to speak by unmuting your mic now.
Janine, they should use the mic function at the top toolbar, correct? Not the one
Yes.
over there, not
Okay.
hovering over their square peg.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay, thank
yes.
you. Sorry
Okay.
about that. I was at wrong place trying to unmute. Thank you.
Okay.
So I understand that there could be 4 reasons. Any one of them could be reason for initiating amendment change request. So I am kind of not quite familiar with a lot of background, but my question is, how often do you see this situation come up? What can we expect? Do you expect it would be like maybe a rare occasion, or you expect could be more than rare? What is that we can expect from this? And for any one reason, could be more than one reason, of course. So just curious as to what might
Sure.
be possibility here.
Yes. I thank you. That is a very good question. Amendments are far less frequent. They're pretty rare. And again, they are making contractual changes. So sometimes there may be, if there is some type of a change or any type of a delay on from in us receiving or being able to have authority to implement funding, and we add funding or we change fund sources. Again, it is very rare that it happens. And then sometimes there may be some unforeseen circumstances with regards to a change of a grant subaward performance period, as an example, where there for whatever reason, maybe there was a delay in implementation, that there is an approved and authorized extension to a grant subaward performance period, or it's reducing. So it's very rare. That conversation will occur when these rare instances happen with your from your grants analyst and the unit chief in advance. On the first 3 types, of which we will go over, those are the rare amendments that your grants analyst and unit chief will alert you of in advance and start coordinating. In the instance of a subrecipient agency name change, that is something that the subrecipient agency will reach out to their grant subaward analyst to notify them of, so that the grants analyst can start that initiating process. But it's a good question. They are very rare, but because this is a process in GCS, it is, we want to provide the training on if and should it happen, you'll understand the steps that that are followed for this process. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Michelle. I moved on to go back up to Deborah Harris. If you can unmute your mic at the top of your screen.
You won't unmute.
Well, we can hear you, so you did a good
You can
job.
hear me. Oh,
We can hear you now.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. And my question is, what is the difference between an amendment versus a modification? I recently did a modification, but some of the steps that you were explaining was the modification. So I'm a little confused.
Yeah, there are some common areas. And so, yes, again, the modification is when you have your executed grant subaward and you're making some general implementation changes within the grant subaward contract, which is not changing. So, for instance, if you have your grant subawards executed for a specific funding and you need to make changes within your budget, that is a modification. If you're changing, somebody, you've had a turnover in your agency and you need to change a grant subaward contact, those are all modifications. Amendments are a higher level contractual change. So those are changing the overall amount of funding to your contract. So we could be increasing or decreasing the funding, which will, of course, result in you needing to modify the budget to those amended amounts. Another contractual is, again, when we add or remove a fund source. So any changes that are made to the application summary or the grant subaward face sheet are considered an amendment. So that's why we only have 4 amendment types. But for modifications, something that does not change your application summary or your contract, those are modifications that are made between the subrecipient and the grant analyst and unit chief. So that stays within victim services. But the amendment process, similar to the application process, does require Cal OES administrative approvals. It goes all the way up to the director designee for signature because it's basically changing the contract.
Understood.
Thanks,
Thank
Deborah.
you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to unmute Debbie S. again. Debbie, can you unmute your mic at the top right of your screen?
Um,
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, you're in.
Okay, we did it. I was going to tell you that, Michelle, you're echoing really bad.
Oh,
Oh,
And it's hard to understand what you guys are talking about.
Oh,
is anybody else?
Let me ask a question, and just so we can. Are you all hearing an echo from me as well? Whoever's unmuted could answer.
Debbie,
Debbie. Yes?
are you
An echo from me as well?
Yes.
Okay, so it's all of us.
This is
Yes.
Karen Stein, not hearing any echo from anybody.
Okay. Okay,
Is
that's
that-
good. So someone was indicating they aren't hearing an echo, but Debbie is hearing an echo for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might
Is
be
she
on
on a
their end.
multiple system? So does Debbie have on a phone and a computer, or too many people close together, it'll create the echo?
Okay. So, Debbie, if you are in a room with multiple people, it might create that echo. Thank you, Karen.
Or multiple devices. If she's on a computer, but voice is on a phone, it can cause that as well.
Okay.
And if you
I'm
are,
on
it may be
I'm
a
on a
connection
laptop.
issue as well, and we can, we can, if you want to attempt to log off and log back in, we can readmit you,
Okay.
and maybe that'll improve your connection.
Okay.
And we promise if you jump off, we won't jump to the end without you.
Okay.
Okay. And we have Karen. Do you have another question, Karen? I'm allowing your mic at this time. Karen?
No, I don't. No, I don't. Thank you. I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank you for answering my question, and I got muted before I could say that. So no, I don't have
Oh,
any
Sorry.
my
other question.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was my fault. I'm sorry.
No
Thank you.
problem. Thank you.
Bye. Okay,
Are there
we
any
have,
others?
yes, we have two more, Michelle.
Okay.
We have Margaret Arona. I'm allowing your mic. If you can unmute in the top right corner.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay. I just wanted to ask if the amendment, while rare, has the similar function that the modification has, in which once you start a modification, no other modifications can be initiated, but you can go in and make changes. So for example, if a amendment is happening and there's a modification that the subgrantee award needs to make, are they able to do that at the same time, or do they have to wait for the amendment to be completed?
Nicole, do you want to answer that one? Or
Yes, I think what you are referring to is Cal OES has initiated an amendment, say for example, to add a fund source, and you have identified as a subrecipient that you also need to update your contact. The answer to that question is yes. So once you have the ability to go in and make form changes, and Michelle's going to cover when we get to that point, when you can go in and make changes to your forms, you do have the ability to go in and select the modification option and the modification type.
right. You can't initiate a separate modification outside of the amendment, but you can add a modification to an amendment that is going to be requiring changes.
Thank you. That answers my question completely.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Any other
And we
questions?
have Carrie Brazil. You can unmute your mic in the upper right corner.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Just wanted to put a recommendation out there for this meeting is if we can open up the chat and everybody can put their questions on the chat instead of blocking the chat and blocking the mic. I think we might have a more productive meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I'm unable to enable chat because it was previously set up to disable chat. But thank you for that suggestion, and we will take that in consideration for our next webinar and any future webinars we conduct. I appreciate it.
Okay,
Any others?
Thank you, Michelle. I don't see any other questions.
Okay. All right. And thank you everyone for those questions. And we will now move into the amendment types, the 4 amendment types that the first is the amount of funding. This the amount of fundings is amendment type 1. That is basically, again, an increase or decrease to the amount of funding to the grant subaward. And change when, again, this is selected, they will unlock some forms. The forms that will be unlocked when the grant analyst selects type amount of funding will be the budget forms, the program narrative, the budget narrative, if there is a budget narrative with the grant subaward, and it can also include the service area. So all of these forms will be unlocked, and when the forms are unlocked and the status is change request, change in progress, the subrecipients will be able to go in and make changes. Now, I do just wanted to kind of inform upfront that we will be providing a table or a slide describing which grant subaward contacts who has the authority to change forms and submit and sign. So we will be covering that moving forward. And the next amendment type is the change to a funding source. So this again, if this type of change will occur to a grant subaward, the grants analyst and or unit chief, your grants analyst will actually be in contact with you all to inform and notify you in advance of this amendment that will be initiated. And they'll go over that so they can prepare you for the changes you'll need to make. This is for a funding source amendment. This is when there is an addition or a removal to a fund source that has been allocated to the executed grant subaward. So these type of changes will unlock the budget forms and again, possibly the budget narrative and program narrative, as well as the grant subaward assurances. And the reason why the assurances form will be unlocked is when there especially is a new federal fund that may be added, the grant subaward authorized agent will need to acknowledge, reading the assurances and acknowledge compliance with those regulations and assurances, award assurances. The next type of amendment is the grants changes to the grant subaward performance period, and you'll see here on this slide, period of performance. For all victim services grant subawards, we use the terminology grant subaward performance period, or GSPP. In GCS, it does indicate POP. We have other areas within grants management here at Cal OES that utilize GCS, and their formal terminology is period of performance. But for the purposes of victim services grants and this presentation today, we will refer to grant subaward performance period, or GSPP. And when this amendment type is selected, the program narrative, budget narrative, budget forms will be unlocked, as well as operational agreements. Because again, if there is an extension to a performance period or even a reduction, the time frame for required operational agreements may also need updates and revisions as well to ensure that they are covering the amended grant subaward performance period accordingly. And next is the amendment type 4, which is the organization or subrecipient agency name change. And again, this is when an agency, and again, this will apply to all of our NGOs or our nonprofits, because governments don't tend to change their names. But when a subrecipient organization has undergone an official name change, this is a little bit of a nuance, or involves a little bit more coordination. The subrecipient must notify their grants analyst in advance to notify them of the change. You can have that conversation on whether the change is in progress or the change has been completed on the official end. And what the grants analyst will need are some official name change documents that are required for them to initiate the process. So one item they will need is the articles of incorporation filed with the Secretary of State that reflect the new agency name. And they will, subrecipients will also need to complete a new or completed payee data record, or a standard 204, 205 form. And this is very important that the name is accurately reflected, so that this information is entered into our system, not only in GCS, but Cal OES Accounting must enter that into the state payment system, also known as Fiscal, which will be the official name. And Fiscal also does align, they do align the names with the IRS verifications as well. So those are two very important forms that the subrecipient will need to submit to the grants analyst for them to initiate this amendment type 4. And two other items that are required on our end to initiate the change in subrecipient name is we have to verify the nonprofit status with the California Attorney General's Office or DOJ. And we also need to do an IRS verification to make sure that the name that the status is current and that the name is consistent. And then once the grants analyst and unit chief, once Cal OES is able to complete initiating this amendment type, the forms that are unlocked include the program narrative, the budget narrative, budget forms, and operational agreements. So now that we've covered the 4 amendment types, I know, in detail, are there any questions related to the types of amendments and the form that are unlocked before we go into the process of the subrecipient process for making changes?
I don't see any hands up.
Okay. So next, here we are back into the process. Next, now that the grant subaward or the change request amendment has been completed by Cal OES and initiated, that will change once the unit chief has approved it. Again, the document status will change from change in progress initiate to change request change in progress. And this is when, again, all of the forms are unlocked for the subrecipient to make changes accordingly. And now we're going to discuss your subrecipient role for initiating and submitting changes. And here is the table for that reflects the roles and authority for all of the contacts identified with the grant subaward. So you'll see here in the first row, the grant subaward contacts that are on the contact form include the grant subaward director, grant subaward financial officer, grant subaward point of contact, and a grant subaward financial point of contact, and then governing board chair. So those each of those contacts will have an assigned role as either an organization enrolled as an organization entity representative or OER, or an organization authorized agent or an OAA. Additionally, what used to be the individual who is authorized or the official designee to sign and submit changes is the grant subaward authorized agent. So when you're in your grant when you look into the contact information for the grant subaward, the individuals listed at the bottom, the person whose name is checked at the bottom of that page will be the grant subaward authorized agent. And moving into the next, so anybody that is a grant subaward contact can actually make changes to forms and view the changes. But when those changes are ready to be submitted, in the next row, you'll see only the grant subaward authorized agent or the governing board chair, if the governing board chair is enrolled in GCS for this grant subaward, will be authorized to submit the changes. And when they submit the changes, that is when everything will be locked, and then we'll discuss further in this presentation. It will be subject to the grants analyst and unit chief review and approval. And then lastly, in the last step of the process, when the unit chief has reviewed and approved the amendment, the changes submitted, the status will change to subrecipient signatures required. So when the amendment is ready to be signed, changes are approved and ready to be signed and submitted for Cal OES director designee approval, the only person who has the authority to sign and submit both the amendment and the assurances, the fund assurances, is the grant subaward authorized agent. So here is how the subrecipient contacts can find the change request amendment, change request for their grant subaward. When you log on to GCS in your dashboard, you can go to My Task and scroll for, look for that particular grant subaward. And if you'll see a few columns over, you'll see that the status says change request, change in progress. And again, anytime the status is change request, change in progress, that means that all of the forms, the required or relevant forms, are unlocked for changes. So then you can click onto that grant subaward, and when you arrive to the document landing change, you'll also see that the document status does say change, also says change request, change in progress. So what you can do is, you can go to all of the forms that are unlocked, and you can start from the top and go from the application information down to the contact information. But you could start at the unlocked forms and click onto those to make the changes. The difference that you'll see when you click on, if you can't remember offhand which forms are specifically unlocked, again, if you go through each form and if you don't see a save button in the upper right hand corner, that means that form is not unlocked for changes. So if you only see the new note or print, that means that it's a locked form. So again, for the amendment types, for amendment type 1, changes to grant subaward funding, if this was a grant subaward funding change, some of the forms that might be unlocked, that would be unlocked are the budget narrative, project narrative, program narrative, service area form, and budget forms. If it's a change to fund source, the assurances, like in this example, is unlocked, as well as the program and budget narrative and budget forms. And if it's a change to the grant subaward performance period, the program and budget narrative and budget forms will be unlocked, as well as the operational agreements. Now, even though all of the forms through the business process are unlocked, it doesn't necessarily mean there are changes, but subrecipients should go and review all of those unlocked forms and make sure that there aren't any relevant changes needed. And again, and then the last amendment is amendment type 4. Again, the operational agreements, contact information, and program and budget narrative forms will be unlocked. Looking at the screen, we see here that's an example of these assurances. So this example would indicate that there is a fund source change. And again, here are the check boxes that you can see. If there is a new funding source that is added to the form, there will be a checkbox to be checked, to filled out and to acknowledge, so the grant subaward authorized agent can acknowledge and the assurance on that. I do want to point out, even though it's not a form that would be unlocked, I do want to point out that a tip to look at funding changes or fund source changes would be to click on the funding source allocation. So when you click onto that document, this will open, and what's really helpful is it will indicate the funding that's available versus the funding requested. So the funding requested column reflects the current grant subaward executed budget or budget forms completed, and the available funding will reflect the amended amount by fund source. So this is helpful again for identifying the allocations by the fund source and the amount of funding to be changed. So if you look at this example, so this will require a little math. How you can understand the amount of funding changes is to subtract the funding requested column amount from the available funding total amount. And in this example, the blue circles reflect that 2 fund sources have additional funds that need to be added. So in the budget forms that will be revised for the cost categories, that amount of additional funds will be added to those fund sources throughout the budget pages. And that'll help for having, again, the numbers that you need to add, but I would also recommend that you do, if you are adding line items or adding to certain new cost categories, that it is an allowable cost for those fund sources. And if you look at the red circle shows that the funding requested, so the funds already allocated, exceeds the funding total. So this the budget cost and the budget form will need to be reduced by the amount of the difference in those between those columns. And then when, again, the change in progress is is still in change in progress, the form still can be unlocked. I mean, the forms are still unlocked for changes. And at this point, you'll also see, again, the grant subaward authorized official or grant subaward budget governing board chair, at the point that all the changes are ready to be submitted, they will have a status option to submit the changes or revise the change type. So this is answering the question previously, whether a grant subaward modification can be submitted when an amendment is in progress. And this is where the answer is yes. So as an example, the amendment is involving a change to funding amount. However, you have a change to your your contacts. So you can, when the changes are being made, you can select modifications and click the contact information, and that will unlock the contact information form for the subrecipient to update. And then the grant subaward authorized agent those changes will be submitted with the amendment changes. And again, modifications are not required to be submitted with a amendment. And the reason why I make this statement is, yes, you will, if there is a change to a funding source or a funding source or a funding amount, you will be changing your budget forms, but you don't need to click modification and for a budget to complete that amendment. The amendment covers all of the relevant contractual changes and the forms that will need to be changed. So you don't need to click on modification to cover that area as well. And so when the grant subaward authorized agent or governing board chair is ready to submit changes, they will click submit changes, and it will give kind of a warning, more or less like an "Are you sure you're ready to submit the changes?" The question will ask change request from change in progress to change request grant change submitted, and then you would hit OK. And the status will change from change request change in progress to change request grants analyst review. When that's when you hit submit the changes, you can go back to the document landing page and check the status, and you'll see that it is now change request grants analyst review. And what that means is that all of the forms are now locked, and so no further changes can be made unless the grant analyst returns that and unlocks the forms. So here, this is where we left off, and we're going to try to we're in this video again. We have a quick video to kind of demonstrate and show all of the processes that we just covered. I just want to preface that this video does have, in addition to the making changes, it does show some of the initiating process by Cal OES as well. So here we go.
So right now I'm logged in as the authorized agent, and there are a couple of things within the document that I think are worth mentioning. So the first is, how do I find the document that I'm looking for? So one of the options is to use my tasks. And as I scroll down at the bottom, I know the one that I've been looking for is actually on the second page. So this is one option to find that document that's in change request initiate status. Another option that I have is to use the searches here. So I can look at recent documents. That also brings me to the 10 most recent documents that I've been in, and I can click the hyperlink here. Either way, it will bring me to my documents landing page. From here, if you remember, I started to initiate a change request. And so this is why my status is still in change request initiate. And there are a few interesting things that I think are worth mentioning here on the document. So you'll notice that the change request, I have now an arrow and a file folder. And that's because I have an amendment that's already been started. So the Cal OES team, the grants analyst or the unit chief has already initiated the amendment for me, but I can still click into that change request form. You'll just notice that, again, I can't change anything or make any selections in regards to the amendments. My justification, however, is something that I can edit, and I can also add, if I needed to, modifications to this section here. So I can select modifications, I can edit the justification, but I can't change anything to the amendments that have been selected. So from here, I don't actually need to make any modifications. I'm just going to go ahead and save what I have. And then to get me into the next phase of this, I'm going to click Save and Proceed. This will bring me back over to the document landing page after I make the selection. Am I sure that I'd like to go from change request initiate to change request submitted? I'm going to click OK. And now you can see that the document status is change request, change in progress. That's exactly where I want to be for the next stage of the amendment process. So now that we are in change request, change in progress, that will unlock a few of the forms here in the sidebar navigation. So first, I'm going to click into this application information just so that we can see as a comparison. Here in the application information form, you'll notice that I have a new note and a print option, but I can't make any edits to this form and I can't save. If I go into program narrative, however, that is a form that unlocks for me. You'll notice now I do have a save option here, and I can scroll all the way through all of these questions if there's one that is something that I would need to edit based on the amendment that I'm working in, or if I need to upload or change any of the uploaded documentation, I can do so here, and then again, save those changes. Another area that is unlocked for me is the budget cost categories form. So when I click into the form here, you'll notice that I can't deselect any of the options that have already been selected, but I can make a further selection here, such as truck costs, or even a second tier subaward cost, for instance. I am going to uncheck that box, and then I'll show you what it looks like to just click into the budget narrative here without saving. So here it gives me a little warning, and it's just a reminder because I did potentially edit this form. It just wants to ask, or it is asking rather, if I'm sure that I would like to proceed without clicking save. So I'm going to go ahead and confirm that because I didn't make any actual edits, and brings me over to the budget narrative form. And again, I have a save option here. Scrolling through this form, you can see the various questions that are asked. And if I needed to make any changes to these questions, I could do so. And then click on, let me scroll back up, click on that save button. I also have the option to click into potentially some of the service area forms, and that would allow me to make edits potentially to those forms as well before selecting my status options. So here I have the option to submit any of those potential changes that I made, or I can revise my change request type. So if I select revise the change request type, that would be if I wanted to make a selection for those modifications that we were reviewing previously. I could begin a modification if I needed to, but right now I'm just going to go ahead and submit the changes made. I'm prompted to answer the question yet again. Am I sure I want to change the status here from change in progress to change submitted? I'm going to click OK. And then we can verify that that change has taken place. So here in the document status, I can see change request is now grant analyst review. That's my status. If I scroll down to my status options, you'll notice I don't have any options right now as the grants analyst is reviewing the documentation. So I can find my way back over to the homepage and perhaps complete another task.
Now, before we go into the next few steps of the process, which will be fairly quicker than the submitting changes part, I wanted to offer the opportunity for any questions. So if anyone has questions, please raise your virtual hand.
We have one. We have Kirit.
Okay.
I am allowing your mic. Kirit, you can unmute your mic in the upper right-hand corner.
Thank you. So one question I have is, you have different types of amendments, 4 different types. Fourth one really depends on the subrecipient initiating it and whatnot. So first 3, is there some kind of a predefined timeline that it has to be completed in, depending on which might be the amendment type? And so there is probably some kind of limited timeline, I understand and expect, but also while it is going on, is it possible to submit expenditure and payment requests while the amendment might be in progress? So a couple of questions kind of built into that.
Okay, Nicole or Janine, I'm sorry, my speaker didn't pick up his questions very well. If you want to repeat the question or answer that question, if you repeat the question, I can address it or you can answer it.
Sure. I'm happy to repeat it and answer it. The
Okay.
first question had to do with the amount of time to complete the amendment. And then the second question had to do with the ability to initiate and submit payment reports. We do want to get the amendments completed as quickly as possible so that we can implement that. Generally speaking, there's not going to be a timeline. Your grants analyst may provide some due dates. It really just depends on the scenario. And to answer the second part of your question, part of the reason why we want to get through processing the amendment as quickly as possible is because it will hold up the ability to submit payment requests. So we want to make sure that you have the ability to submit a payment request as quickly as possible. And the way to achieve that is to get the amendment process done as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, understand.
Yeah,
Thank
and I
you.
did want to preface, thank you, Nicole, that you can, while an amendment is in process, a payment request can be initiated, so you can have that ready to go. But in all cases, except for the change to the grant subaward performance period, that request will not be able to be submitted. So it'll just sit there as a completed form, but it won't be able to be submitted until the amendment is completed. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
Sure,
So
you can please lower your hand. That would be great. Thank you.
okay. And Janine, I think you can too. Go to hit 3 dots and hit lower hand. You got it. Perfect. Beautiful. And the next part we're going to go to is the grant analyst review. And again, now that the changes have been submitted, when it's in grants analyst review status, the subrecipient, cannot make any further changes. The grants analyst review is now reviewing all of the submitted changes. And during this time, when the grants analyst is reviewing through all the forms, they have 3 status options. Their status options include sending back for revisions. So if they're reviewing the changes submitted and something either doesn't make sense or maybe the calculations aren't working or adding up per their review, they will send those back for revision for the subrecipient to make further changes. And at which time the status will revert back to change request, change in progress. And all of those same forms for the amendment will be unlocked for changes. I do want to make a note at this point, if the grant subaward authorized agent, hit that button to submit changes, but then after they hit yes, submit the changes, and they realize, oh man, I needed to, check something else, or I made a mistake. There's an error. They know there's an error. You can reach out to your grants analyst, let them know to have them select the send back for revisions so that you can make those additional changes or do a further review because maybe you were unsure that you made a correct change. So you can, if in haste or by mistake you submitted changes, and you can have the grant analyst unlock those forms. Again, but the other status option is to cancel the change request. And then the third option, if the grants analyst has reviewed all the changes and everything looks fine, they can hit send, approve it, and select send to unit chief for review. And going forward, once they have approved it and hit send for unit review, the unit chief will now review the changes submitted. And during this time, the unit chief has 3 status options. They can deny the change request. They can send it back if they are reviewing it and something not quite clear or they don't understand. They may hit send back to grants analyst for review. And when it goes back to grants analyst for review status, the grants analyst will have to need to take another look at that. And they may, if something, an error needs to be corrected by the subrecipient, they will send back to subrecipient for changes. So if and when the unit chief does review and they are able to approve the amendment changes, they will hit the submit review button. And when the submit review button is selected, that means they have approved those amendment changes, and now it will go into change the status to change request subrecipient signatures required. So the subrecipient signatures required step is part of the business process in GCS for the grant subaward authorized agent to sign the contractual changes or to sign the amendments that have been approved, reviewed and approved by the grants analyst and the unit chief. And I wanted to point out this is an additional step through the GCS process, business process, because as mentioned earlier, when when it's a change request, change in progress, and all of the authorized the OERs or the OAAs that are on the contact information have the ability to go in and change the forms and make those changes. Those changes that are applied to what has been approved by the grants analyst and the unit chief are now part of the formal contract change. So this is that final step for the grant subaward authorized agent to put affix their signature onto this amended contract. So again, in this final step, only the grant subaward authorized agent can sign and submit. The governing board chair does not have the authority to sign and submit at this point. And when the grant subaward authorized agent logs into GCS, here is how they will sign and submit. They will go into the My Task and find that applicable grant subaward. And again, you'll see that status says subrecipient signatures required, they will click onto that grant subaward, and at the top of the screen on the document landing page, they'll see that there's an alert next to the change request, which basically indicates that there is an action needed on the change request. So when they click onto change request and go into the amendment, they will notice that there is an attention box that will that is calling attention. You can do one of two things at this point. You can actually, the where it says authorized agent signature is required, that is actually a hyperlink. So whenever there is an error message or an attention, those are live hyperlinks where you can click onto that and it'll take you to the area where action or changes are needed. In this case, if you click onto that hyperlink, it will take the authorized agent GSAA to the bottom of the page to click that for signing. And once they've checked that box, they will go back to the upper right-hand corner and hit save. And when they hit save, their name and the date signed will be generated. And when that has been generated and they're ready to submit, there is, and you don't see it on the screen, but right below that author amendment signature box is a save and submit button. They will hit save and submit, and that will again ask the question to whether they want to submit. And when they hit OK, that will now change the status to financial operations review. So again, if you want to make sure the save and submit was worked and it's submitted, you can go back to the document landing page, and as long as it says financial operations review, that is now going to go up through the Cal OES administration process for budget and director and accounting reviews, approvals, and entries. So, and at this point, when the signatures have been submitted, the amendment is completely locked. So the grant analyst, unit chief, nor will the subrecipient be able to make any further changes, because now this contractual amendment is in the process of being reviewed by Cal OES administration. I'm going to do a quick video. This one's a quicker video showing the signature process that we just followed, but it's more of a live demo. And here we go.
So now it's time to sign off on the amendment that has been created and approved thus far. You'll notice that the document is in change request subrecipient signature required. And if we bring our attention over here to the change request, you'll notice that there is an exclamation point. So that tells us there's something for us to do on the form. Clicking into amendment number 2 is where we will acknowledge. We do have an attention message here letting us know that the authorized agent signature is required. Now we can either scroll down or just by simply clicking on the link that draws the attention right down to the bottom of the page. So as the authorized agent, I have the opportunity to click the box saying I have reviewed and approved the above information. And now when I bring this into focus here, when I click save and give it just a moment, we can see then the name. In this case, my name that I am logged into is agent authorized, but your name will appear here as well as the date. So we can see the acknowledgement has been executed successfully. And then if we scroll all the way down, we can submit. Again, we are prompted to verify that we are ready to make the status push. In this case, we will be pushing our document into change request, financial operations review, and click OK. Back on the landing page, we can verify that our document is now in the correct status. And as we scroll all the way down, just observing that there are no more status options to perform on this document.
And now that the amendment has been signed by the subrecipient and submitted. This is just a quick slide to demonstrate all of the areas within Cal OES that are the financial that are part of the financial or the different statuses moving forward to get it back into completion or grant subaward executed status. First, Cal OES financial ops reviews it and they review it and approve it. Then it goes over to fiscal officer over in the budget office where they review and make all of the relevant changes because they at the highest level oversee all of the funding that is allocated to our agency and to our branch for funding. And when that has been approved, it will go over to the exec office for a director or director's office, director's designee signature. And when they have signed that, it does go back to over to Cal OES accounting for them to make all of the approved changes in fiscal, again, that state payment system to ensure that whether it's a new name or the funding amounts, all of the contractual changes are made in the fiscal system. And once they have completed all of those steps, the document status will go into grants back to grant subaward executed. So that will, again, if there is a payment request that was initiated, that can now be submitted, and you can proceed with all other implementations. Before we go further into the last couple of slides, we're just basically at the end here, but I wanted to offer a last chance for any additional questions. So if there are any questions, please raise your hand.
Have one.
Okay.
Swinny, you are now able to unmute your mic in the upper right-hand corner.
Hi. So my question is, do we have a similar webinar for modifications, budget grant modifications?
Okay. I'm sorry, what's the question on modifications, Nicole or
We have
Janine?
a similar webinar. We have a similar webinar for the modifications.
Oh, yes, we do. And it actually, we did that webinar back in January when the modifications, change request modifications went live in GCS. That is on our Victim Services Trainings webpage. In a further slide, I'll show you where you can find that, where you can navigate to that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Any other questions?
I don't see any other questions.
Okay. Well, we are coming towards the end of our webinar, and thank you again for being with us today. I did want to include some reminders and additional information that we may have touched on or covered during this webinar. Modifications can be included with the change request amendment as demonstrated during this webinar. I do want to suggest that if you are adding a modification to an amendment, go ahead and notify your grants analyst so they can ensure that they're reviewing it as well. And if they have any questions on a modification being added, they can discuss that with you. And then again, throughout the process, the great thing about GCS is you can actually get live updates without having to call or email your grant analyst. You can, when you're in your dashboard, you can see the current status of the amendment as it's happening. And in the beginning of this presentation, you saw all of the different statuses from change request, change in progress, all the way to change request, director, designee, review. And then when you see that final status updated or a status as grants back to grant subaward executed, that indicates that the amendment has been completed. And lastly, as we touched on, payment requests can be initiated while a change request amendment is in progress. Again, when the amendment is related to a change in funding amount, fund source, or subrecipient organization name change, you will not be able to submit that payment request, but of course you can initiate that. Only in the case of a amendment related to the grant subaward performance period change, a payment request may be submitted. And here we are intending to upload the recording of this video along with any training materials, the slide deck, and related to this training. It will be on our Victim Services Trainings webpage. Here is the link for that. I know it is very long. I suggest if you're in your web browser or Google, just search for Cal OES Victim Services Trainings, and that should take you right to the link to open up that trainings page. That is where this training, as well as the webinars related to change request modifications and GCS payment request. Those previous webinars conducted are also loaded with their training materials on that webpage. And again, thank you so much for being with us today or returning with us today for this webinar related to the GCS change request amendments. If you have any further questions related to this or any questions related to GCS in general, please feel free to contact your grants analyst. Yeah. Thank you and have a great day.